The fall air of 1973 carried with it the tang of freshly cut grass and the faint hum of a marching band practicing in the distance. Briarwood High School buzzed with the energy of teenagers who thought their world stretched only as far as the football field and the cafeteria. Eleanor Carter, 16, was the kind of girl who melted into the background. She had chestnut hair she often wore in a braid, hand-me-down dresses, and a quiet way about her that made teachers smile but classmates overlook her. She loved books more than dances, and the library was her sanctuary. Then there was James Whitaker. James wasn't a captain of the football team, but he might as well have been. He had that easy confidence that drew people in. Sandy blonde hair, a crooked smile, and a laugh that echoed down hallways. His leather jacket was scuffed at the elbows, and he strummed his guitar between classes, humming Bob Dylan songs. They shouldn't have crossed paths, but they did in Mrs. Donnelly's English class, where fate has a funny way of seating opposites side by side. Eleanor Carter, Mrs. Donnelly said, scanning the roster, "You'll be paired with James Whitaker for the semester project." Eleanor's heart sank. James barely knew she existed, and now she'd have to share notebooks, ideas, and time with him. But James surprised her. When class ended, he leaned against her desk and said, "So, Eleanor, do you want to meet after school tomorrow? We could knock this thing out fast." She looked up, startled. "Tomorrow?" He grinned. "Unless you're too busy reading all the books in the library." Her lips twitched into the smallest smile. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. That was the beginning. Not just of a school project, but of something that neither of them could have predicted. Working on the project turned into late afternoons in the library, their heads bent close over poetry anthologies and Shakespearean tragedies. Eleanor discovered James wasn't just a charming boy who made teachers roll their eyes. He had opinions. He argued passionately about themes of freedom, love, and rebellion. He made her laugh, really laugh, in a way no one else had. Romeo was an idiot, James declared one afternoon. Jumping headfirst into love like that? That's not romantic, that's reckless. Eleanor raised her eyebrow. "So you don't believe in love at first sight?" He smirked. "Not unless it's you holding a library card." Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked down at her notebook. By homecoming, James asked Eleanor to the dance. He did it in his James way, casually, like it wasn't a big deal, but his eyes gave him away. "Eleanor, want to skip the dance and sneak into the diner instead?" he asked one afternoon while they walked home. She tilted her head. "Are you asking me on a date?" "Guess I am." That night, they shared their first milkshake at Mel's Diner. He told her about his dream of traveling the country with his guitar. She told him about wanting to study literature and maybe, someday, write a book. By the end of the night, when he walked her home and brushed his lips against hers, Eleanor knew her world had shifted. They were young, naive, and thought forever was theirs for the taking. 3 years later, Briarwood High's class of '76 tossed their caps into the sky. Eleanor and James, hand in hand, felt invincible. But life doesn't pause for sweethearts. Choices loomed like storm clouds. Eleanor received an acceptance letter from Columbia University in New York. James got an offer to play guitar for a touring band that crisscrossed the Midwest. "You'll come with me," James said one July evening as they sat on the hood of his car under a sky freckled with stars. Eleanor hesitated. "And what about my scholarship?" "College will still be there," he argued. "But this chance, it won't wait." Her heart split in two. She loved him, but she also loved her dream. In the end, she left for New York. The goodbye was messy. Tears on the train platform. Promises shouted over the whistle of the engine. James pressed a silver locket into her hand, the tiny photo of them at prom tucked inside. "I'll find you again," he said, his voice cracking. She nodded, unable to speak, and then she was gone. Eleanor thrived in New York. She published essays, took internships, and eventually became a journalist for a respected magazine. Her life was fast-paced, glittering, and full of opportunities. But every now and then, when the city lights dimmed and she was alone in her apartment, she touched the locket and wondered about James. James, meanwhile, rode buses from one smoky bar to another, guitar slung over his back. The band never made it big, but they made memories, endless nights of music, mistakes, and freedom. He wrote Eleanor letters, though he never sent them. By the mid-1980s, both of them had built lives without each other. Eleanor married a fellow journalist, though the marriage eventually crumbled. James opened a small music store in his hometown after the band dissolved. They weren't kids anymore. They were adults, shaped by choices and regrets. But somewhere in the corners of their hearts, the memory of first love lingered, unshakable like an unfinished song. By the 1990s, Eleanor was established in her career. She worked as an editor for a publishing house in Boston. Her days spent combing through manuscripts, and her nights filled with book launches and literary circles. On the surface, she had everything she wanted, but behind closed doors, she often wondered why success felt so hollow. James, meanwhile, had traded bar gigs for stability. His music store, Whitaker Strings and Things, became a staple in his town. Teenagers with big dreams came for guitar lessons. Parents came for instruments, and James became the mentor he never expected to be. One autumn weekend, Eleanor traveled to a writers' conference in Chicago. At the very same time, James was there too, meeting an old bandmate who now worked in the recording industry. They walked the same streets, stayed just a few blocks apart, and even dined in the same cafe on different days. They didn't know it, but life had brought them within a breath of each other, only for timing to pull them apart again. Sometimes fate teases before it delivers. Eleanor's mother fell ill in the early 2000s, and she returned to her hometown, the very place where her teenage love had bloomed. She spent weeks caring for her mother, driving familiar roads that now felt strange. One evening, she stopped by a music shop to buy a set of strings for her nephew's guitar. She walked into Whitaker Strings and Things, James's shop, but James wasn't there. He was out running an errand. She bought the strings from a young clerk, her eyes wandering over the walls lined with guitars, signed posters, and photos of smiling students with their instruments. One frame caught her eye. James, older, with streaks of gray in his hair, standing proudly with a student holding a trophy. Her breath caught. He looked happy, different but still him. She almost asked the clerk if he was around. Almost. But fear won. She left without saying a word. When James returned, the clerk mentioned, "A woman was in here earlier," said she liked the shop. James smiled vaguely, not knowing how close he had been to seeing Eleanor again. James never married. He had relationships, even came close once, but no one ever replaced a girl with a chestnut braid who loved books more than anything. In quiet nights, he still strummed a guitar and hummed the tune of a song he once wrote for Eleanor, though he never finished it. Eleanor remarried after her divorce, this time to a kind man who shared her love of quiet evenings and old movies. But Wade passed away unexpectedly. She found herself once again alone. One winter evening in 2012, cleaning out her attic, Eleanor found a box of old letters James had written her back in the 1970s. She had saved every single one. The handwriting was uneven, the ink faded, but the words were alive with hope, love, and promises. She sat on the floor, tears slipping down her cheeks, wondering why she had let him slip through her fingers. That night, she almost searched for him online, but she didn't. Fear, pride, or maybe just the weight of decades kept her still. Time doesn't slow. 50 years since their high school graduation arrived like a quiet knock on the door. A letter came in the mail, Briarwood High School class of 1973, 50th reunion. Eleanor chuckled when she opened it. She had skipped all the others, the 10-year, the 20, the 30, even the 40. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was age, or the awareness that there might not be another chance. She packed the silver locket James had given her, the one she still carried after all these years. On the other side of town, James received the same invitation. He hadn't gone to any reunions either. No point in looking back, he always told himself. But this time, he stared at the paper for a long time. His students were grown, his shop quieter now. He had fewer excuses to avoid the ghosts of the past. He placed the invitation on his counter, and for the first time in years he thought, what if she's there? The Briarwood High Gymnasium looked nothing like it had 50 years ago. The bleachers had been replaced, the floors polished, the banners new, but the ghost of teenage laughter seemed to linger in the air. Eleanor walked in slowly, her silver hair curled neatly, wearing a navy dress and a shawl. Her chestnut braid was long gone, but the locket at her neck sparkled as though no time had passed. She scanned the crowd. Old friends hugged, laughed, compared photos of grandchildren. Teachers long retired posed for pictures with former students. It was warm, lively, but Eleanor's heart pounded only for one question. Would James be here? Meanwhile, James stood just inside the entrance, smoothing the collar of his blazer. His hair was almost entirely gray now, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his hazel eyes still carried that boyish light. He carried nothing but his wallet, and tucked inside, a folded photo of a 17-year-old Eleanor with her chestnut braid. For nearly an hour, they circled the gym, talking to old classmates, unaware of how close they were. And then, across the room, their eyes met. It wasn't dramatic, like the movies. No music swelled. No one gasped. Just two people staring at each other, as if time folded in on itself. Eleanor, James whispered, moving toward her. James, she breathed. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, almost shyly, Eleanor touched the locket. I kept it. James swallowed hard. I never stopped writing songs for you. The gym faded away. For the first time in 50 years, it was just them again, the girl with the braid and the boy with the guitar. They sat together all evening, catching up on decades in the span of hours. There were tears, laughter, and silences heavy with what-ifs. Eleanor admitted she had seen his shop once, but hadn't been brave enough to say hello. James confessed he had written her 100 letters he never sent. I thought you'd forgotten me, she said softly. Never, he replied. I just thought you deserved better than a boy who couldn't give you the world. She smiled, eyes shimmering. James, you were my world. When the night ended, classmates lingered, but everyone noticed the way James and Eleanor walked out together, side by side, as if 50 years had melted away. In the weeks that followed, they became inseparable again. Long walks, quiet dinners, late-night phone calls that turned into early morning ones. They weren't teenagers anymore, but the love, scarred age but alive, had waited patiently all this time. One evening, sitting on the porch at Eleanor's home, James pulled out his guitar. His fingers shook a little more than they used to, but the melody was steady. He sang the song he'd started in 1973 and never finished. This time, he finished it. Eleanor cried, resting her head on his shoulder. 50 years after high school, the crown jewel of Briarwood gossip wasn't about who had the best career or the biggest house. It was about the two sweethearts who found their way back after half a lifetime apart. Sometimes love doesn't vanish. Sometimes it just waits. And when it returns, it's stronger than ever,